What up, everybody? It's your Believe in Right here, and today we're going to react to film theories. Which of the Incredibles is the most incredible? I guess that's like just saying which one has the most impressive feats. And I would assume that Jack Jack, because Jack Jack can do. He's a shapeshifter. He can do pretty much anything. And like as we saw in the movie, like when Syndrome's taken off, he turned into like I think it was steel or something really heavy. So he can change his the density of how much he weighs and stuff like that. So I would assume Jack Jack is the strongest one. But let's. What did you say? One more time. Jack of all trades. Yeah. I couldn't hear you because my headphones were open. Yeah. So I would assume Jack Jack's the strongest, or the best rather. But let's see what my fact says.
Everyone's special, Dash. Which is another way of saying no one is.
Fine, have it your way, Dash. Let's pit you against your family in a battle to the death to see which special is the
death
most
battle.
special of all the specials.
It's time for a
Death battle! I can't wait for that to come back.
Internet,
welcome to Film Theory,
the only show that can monologue longer than a villain in a superhero movie.
You sly dog! You got me monologue!
Edna.
I can't believe it.
Today I'm covering what's perhaps the most beloved movie in Pixar's lineup, The
That's because it's the best movie in
Incredibles.
Pixar's lineup.
Probably earned that title because a lot of you watching saw it when you were kids. A fact that, in retrospect, is a bit alarming considering what the movie's really about. I mean, for a family-friendly film, you have a villain that actually kills people, a wife that suspects that her husband is cheating, and repeated deaths by engine turbine.
Yeah. It's the best movie.
A weird message too, where Buddy, the young fanboy who's shunned by his hero, pulls himself up by his bootstraps to become a billionaire weapons designer, using his genius intellect to create devices that give him the power of a superhero himself, which honestly is a story arc that should be praised. I gotta say, as the one who felt
I told you, it's the best.
School, I totally relate to this guy's story. He should be a good role model. He didn't give up. He used his innate abilities to get better, to get to the position where he wanted to be. But instead, in this movie, he has an inferiority complex and becomes a sociopathic killer.
You mean you killed off real heroes so that you could pretend to be one?
Oh, I'm real, and I did it without your precious gifts, your oh-so-special powers.
You're rough for that hair, though.
Sir, I totally feel what you're going for here, but seriously, intelligence should be a real superpower. But nope, not in The Incredibles, and then the rest of the film treats him like a joke, until he dies a gruesome death and the heroes are all solidified as the ones who are born with their innate abilities. Clearly, this movie believes that some people are just more super than others. Since you killed off the character I most relate to in the movie, I'm going full super villain and giving you a dose of your own medicine. Which
I just like Batman better.
is the most super in the Power family?
What is that fighting stance? What is this?
Powerful Incredible. Is it the Speed Demon Dash, the quiet Psychic Violet, the flexible Elastigirl, or the brute force of Mr. Incredible? There's also the baby Jack Jack, the big wild card in the family whose powers seem to vary from setting himself on fire to changing to different materials. You could say he's
That's what I said.
Jack Jack of all trades, but knowing
Nick. Matthew just made the pun. Jack Jack of all trades. Just let that sit there for a little bit.
how Hollywood storytelling works, and based on the fact that the trailers are already playing all this up, it probably means he's going to be revealed to be the most powerful character in Incredibles 2. So I'm taking him out of the conversation.
Okay, so we're not even considering Jack Jack.
Your bets, ladies and gentlemen, because 4 Incredibles enter, 1 Incredible leaves. Man, I really am starting to sound like Syndrome.
Calm down.
Everyone can be super, and when everyone's super,
No one will be.
no one will be.
Man, I love this
First things
movie.
first, if you want to talk about raw strength, then you have to talk about Mr. Incredible. Even if Bob Parr has put on a few pounds since retiring from his superhero days, he
lost
a
it.
hunk of muscle, tossing around cars the same way most of us would toss around a frisbee. Well, I guess if he were really throwing the car like I throw a frisbee, it would mean he would throw the car, and it would immediately karate chop down into the ground and then roll around on its edge in a direction completely opposite the thing I was trying to throw it at, just rubbing the shame in my face as as it rolls. But where we really see him start to push his powers to their limits,
Oh, hi, Goku.
halts a train traveling at full speed right in its tracks. To figure out how much force he needs to stop that train, we need to know
That was the most impressive feat that he had.
acceleration, how quickly he was able to bring that train to a halt, and the train's mass. Calculating the train's mass is a bit difficult because for the brief moments that the train is actually seen on screen, we never see how many train cars there are. However, with a bit of historical research, we can actually come up with a pretty good guess on how many train cars there were, how much they weighed, and how fast the train would have to have been moving.
Alright, so we can get close enough.
The mass of each railway car, we can compare it to a similar railway car in the real world.
Chicago!
We see Bob
Or was that New York?
The Metroville
I don't know.
Tribune, which, when you zoom in real close, shows that the second half of this movie is set in the year 1962. The
Wow.
train stopping scene happens in the movie's opening moments before a 15 years later flash forward, meaning that that scene with the train happens in 1947. Details also point to the city of Metroville being based on Chicago. The font
That
of
is
the
Chicago.
newspaper make it
I know my
to
city.
the famous Chicago Tribune. And Chicago is a metropolitan city that had a booming economy during the time period of the movie. More importantly, Chicago is also famous for its L train, short for elevated train, that served as
And I direct you all to Nick's L-Train system maps that he acquired.
a citywide rapid transit system since 1892. Based on the year the movie takes place and the appearance of the cars, they appear to be the Metroville equivalent of the Chicago L Train's Steel 5000 series cars, which were in service from 1947 to 1985. We also know, based on historical research, that the 5000 series of car had an unloaded weight of 93,000 pounds, plus another 14,688 pounds from the weight of all the passengers inside. And yes, I calculated that using the average weight of a person in 1950, which I might note is over 20 pounds lighter than the average weight for a person in the year 2000. Hey, you have to account for everything when it comes to historical accuracy, and also our ever-expanding waistlines. Lastly, the length of the train. In the scene, we're able to count 11 visible railway cars, and based on everything we know about elevated trains in the 1940s, which is a surprisingly large amount after doing this episode, the train probably wouldn't be any longer than that. In fact, it was uncommon for trains to be longer than 6 cars during commuter hours way back then. All of that gives us a grand total of 1,184,568 pounds for the mass of the train. That is 592 tons. Mr. Incredible certainly knows what to do. And
he stopped it within that small amount of space.
Train from 55 miles per hour to a screeching halt in just under 10 seconds.
Yeah.
7.9 seconds if we want to be exact. To do that to a 592-ton train, he'd need to exert a force of 1,333,000 newtons. That's the equivalent of 299,670 pounds.
Give us a better...
Just for comparison, a
Thank
study
you.
of 70 boxers found that elite-level fighters punch with an average of 776 pounds of force, with the strongest one ever not being able to reach 1,300 pounds of force. Bob's punch, by comparison, would be 230 times stronger than that. They don't call him Mr. Incredible for nothing, and with that, 1,333,000 newtons of force is our number to beat. Next up is Helen Parr, aka Mom, aka Alaska.
So we're talking about who?
Alaska.
We're talking about who can do the most output when it comes to force. And if that's the case, then Dash wins, because Dash can be like the Flash and like increase the amount of force he puts out by running. So simply, if you're going by force output, Dash wins.
The girl's strength is a bit trickier here, since she's not really about raw strength, but rather raw stretch. We never really get to see her stretched to her limits, haha, but we do get to see how flexible her abilities are. Badoom-ching, alright, I'm
Stop.
done.
Yeah, okay,
She
thank
has
you.
Parachute mode, boat mode, hovercraft mode, limbo mode, shield offspring from oncoming homing
Limbo
missile,
mode?
explosion mode. Hold up, completely shielding the kids from an explosion of a homing missile? Yikes! If her body is able to go full Groot and repel the force of an explosion,
It wasn't.
protecting what's inside,
It wasn't. It was the suit.
strong. And based on her passing out in the aftermath of the explosion, it's pushing her powers to their limits. So that is the scene.
It
we're
was
gonna
the suit.
analyze. But just
Okay.
how strong is she? Let's look at the missiles. We don't actually see any other aircraft in the vicinity, so
It wasn't her. It was the suit. But I'm just letting it slide.
SAMs, as opposed to air-to-air missiles. But how powerful are they? Well, when it comes to surface-to-air missiles, the explosive yield will ultimately depend on the warhead it's carrying, but faster usually means more powerful. I mean, the fastest missiles in the world are ICBMs, which can reach speeds of over Mach 15. 15 times the speed of sound! And they're usually designed to carry nuclear warheads. It's a scary thought. Anyway, from the way that the missiles
yeah, that is kind of scary.
Speed the plane, we can assume that they're probably moving at close to the same rate. Now, a typical commercial jet would be able to hit speeds of around 600 miles per hour, which is subsonic. Less than the speed of sound, not even Mach 1. And we never actually see Helen's plane cross any sound barriers even as she's trying to avoid these missiles. So that means that the missiles must be moving pretty slowly. Currently, the slowest and typically weakest surface-to-air missiles used by the US military still hit a speed of around Mach 2.5, which means that Syndrome's weapons budget was more focused on building killer robots and not so much on buying anti-aircraft missiles. Information on this subject is a bit hard to find, and digging around for it has undoubtedly put me back on top of several government watch lists. A trusted traveler pass I worked a year to get, but out of all the missiles used by the US military, the slowest one is the RIM-116 Rolling Airframe Missile. RAM, a missile delivering a warhead with an explosive yield equivalent of 47.279 megajoules, or just around 24.9 pounds of TNT. But here's where things get even more complicated. In the scene, we see not one, not two, but 3 missiles. Also, Elastigirl isn't even the first thing the explosion hits, impacting the plane before even hitting her. Also, we have to consider the fact that Elastigirl isn't at the epicenter of the explosion when the missiles go off. This all matters because what we think of as an explosion is basically just a shock wave that gets weaker and weaker as you move away from the epicenter. And this drop-off happens exponentially. So this time, we're just gonna have to do some rough estimations. If we estimate that the plane's main body, or fuselage, is 10 centimeters thick aluminum, standard for a typical Boeing aircraft, and we use what we know about the impact strength of aluminum, and estimate Elastigirl's distance from the initial explosion at around 3 meters based on the size and shape of the cabin and where we see the missile impact the aircraft, Elastigirl's body is absorbing a whopping 3,510,000 pounds of force. That is more than 10 times as much force as we calculated for Mr. Incredible to stop that moving train. Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a new front runner, and a new definition of girl power, and a new definition of Wonder Woman. Okay, I'll stop. Up next is Flash. I mean Dash, the speedster of the family. Who knows though, maybe Incredibles 2 will feature Reverse Dash, complete with a yellow costume. They could even completely rip off the Flash and recreate that time that the Flash was shot with a fat ray, kidnapped and then put on display as the 1,000-pound blunder, like some sort of freak show. Ha! You get it? Because he's obese now. Yikes! The 60s were a very different time. Anyway, Dash
was that Superman getting spanked
a lot throughout the movie, but believe it or not, the greatest feat of speed that we actually see him pull off is when he rushes up to his teacher's desk to place a thumbtack on the seat, then rushes back to his seat.
This little rat is guilty! He's guilty! You can see it on his smug little face. Guilty, I say guilty!
Hey dude, calm down. Why are you freaking out? It's just a prank, bro. Don't be a prick about it. Get it? Prick. Because it's a thumbtack. Anyway, the teacher, determined to catch Dash in the act, has a surveillance camera record the incident. And for a single frame of the video, we see Dash moving. If we assume that the video is recording at 24 frames per second, as most video cameras did back in 1962,
and it is in black and white,
covering a distance of about 4 meters in just 1/24th of a second. That translates to a speed of 96 meters per second, or 214 miles per hour. But does that give Dash the ability to topple his mother's strength? Earlier, we saw Mr. Incredible stop a speeding L train, but could he stop Dash running towards him at top speed? Well, what's most impressive about Dash isn't his speed so much as it is his acceleration. The fastest sports cars on Earth take around 2 seconds to go from 0 to 60 miles per hour. Dash is able to go from 0 to 214 miles per hour
within, that's true,
then reverse his direction to get back to his seat again in just a tiny fraction of a second. Literally less than the blink of an eye. I ran the numbers and he's accelerating at a rate of 9,216 meters per second square. To figure out whether Dash can actually topple his father, we use one of my favorite equations of all time on the show, FMA, or force equals mass times acceleration.
Yep, physics, I remember it, it sucked.
We just found his acceleration. Now multiply that by the average mass for a 10-year-old boy, which is about 72 pounds or 32.5 kilograms, and we
Kilograms
find
would be
out
better
that
for certain-
Dash's speedy little legs are generating
for this.
299,500 newtons of thrust, the equivalent of 67,300 pounds of force, which is more thrust than the engine of a Boeing 747 commercial jetliner. With force and speed like that, perhaps his most amazing super ability is the fact that he's able to get away with that tack prank. He should be causing a massive wind that sends papers, at the very least, flying throughout the classroom. Anyway, at just under 300,000 newtons, he's still a million newtons away from the raw strength of his father. To match the force of his dad, Dash would need to put on a few pounds. A few hundred pounds, in fact. Starting with that 1.3 million newton threshold we calculated for dear old dad and dividing by Dash's acceleration, he'd need to weigh in at 141 kilograms or 310 pounds to tackle his father. And way more than that to punch through his mother's elasticity. 837
Alright, but he's still a kid,
pounds,
and he's still my
or a
favorite,
whopping
so.
380 kilograms. Where is a good politically incorrect flash fat ray when you need it? And then there was one. 14-year-old
Alright, Violet.
the bashful shy girl who wants nothing more than to reject her superpowers and be normal herself. Now, she's a tricky one since her powers aren't physical like anyone else in her family. First, the girl who wants to hide from the world can, appropriately enough, turn invisible. But more to our purposes, she can create force fields capable of blocking pretty much anything. And you can't have a force field without the word force, the exact measurement we've been using to compare the family. We
I mean,
find out
okay.
about 90 minutes into the movie that Violet's force fields can easily deflect bullets. Using the performance of a standard issue M16 rifle as reference with a 960 meter per second muzzle velocity, 4.02 grams mass per bullet, and an estimated stopping distance of 0.01 meters.
That's a lot of math.
She's creating is acting with 83,288 pounds of force, 370,000 newtons.
Okay.
That alone puts her ahead of her brother when it comes to raw strength, but it's not even close to the full extent of her force field's power.
You have more power than you realize. Don't think. And don't worry. If the time...
For the longest time I thought she was Jennifer Aniston, and I don't think she is.
It's in your blood.
In the final battle against Syndrome's Omnidroid version 10, she pulls out her strongest force field to protect Dash from the giant robot. The Omnidroid 10 is a metal sphere with a hull thickness of about ½ a meter and a diameter of about 39.6 meters. And we know this by comparing it to the size of the buildings we see it next to, where it appears to be about 12 stories high. Accounting for the fact that the Omnidroid appears to be mostly hollow inside, the metal part alone would have a volume of 2,402 cubic meters. That amount of steel would have a mass of 1.85 times 10 to the 7th kilograms, or 40,780,000 pounds. Newton's third law, you know, the one that says that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, tells us that if Violet is supporting an object that weighs 40 million pounds, then her force field has to exert an upward force of 40 million pounds. 181,398,476,000 newtons. That is nearly 180 times the force that her father used to stop that train, and over 10
but
times what her mom
are we
was
forgetting that
doing.
Mr. Incredible also
And
stopped the
that's not
Omnidroid
even
from crushing
calculating
Dash?
the fact that the robot is slamming its body into the force field, which means that we have unequivocally found our strongest Incredible. It is
Mr. Incredible.
dear old dad.
Right.
Yeah. The force field would make Violet the strongest Incredible by an enormous margin if it weren't for the fact that several seconds later, when Violet passes out from the effort of holding up that object, we see her father step in to save the day by lifting up the exact same Omnidroid, and unlike Violet, he's able to sustain that weight without passing out from the effort. But that's impossible, I hear you saying. I said it too when I was researching this episode. Violet has to be the strongest. From our calculations, Mr. Incredible holding up that robot takes more than 100 times the amount of force that we saw him use to stop the train at the
That doesn't
start
mean
of the
he
movie.
doesn't have the
It's not
ability
like
to
he
do
wasn't
it.
trying when it came to stopping that train. He knew that there were a lot of lives at stake, and he barely managed to stop it before it fell off the rails. So how is it that we see him so much stronger at the end of the movie, especially when we know that this is after 15 years of him being out of service as a super? Well, maybe this heroic feat of strength is chalked up to the greatest superpower of them all, family.
Okay, alright.
Ugh, gag. bag me. Cut it out with your family kumbaya nonsense, you hippies. But seriously,
where's the science? Thank you.
At stake, Bob leaps to their defense and provides the most monumental demonstration of strength that we see throughout the entire movie. This is actually known as hysterical strength.
Which is a thing. Yeah, I know about
beyond
this.
what's believed to be normal, usually occurring when people are in life and
Hancock. I should watch that movie. That was a great movie.
Associated with stories of parents lifting vehicles to save their kids. In this case, it's Bob Parr lifting a giant death droid to save his kids. Scientific evidence to prove it is scarce, since, as you can imagine, it's a bit hard to test this sort of thing in a lab. Hey, we're gonna put your kid under a car. Go lift it! But it is theoretically possible, believed to be tied to the body increasing adrenaline production in times of crisis. So Violet is definitely number one, unless parental instincts come into play. And you know what? That seems like a fitting climax for a movie that's ultimately more about
family. Yeah, I'll accept that.
Sometimes it takes the family to save the day. And even though Dash and Violet might not be as strong as their dad, in a way, they were indirectly responsible for his greatest feat of strength. And that's Disney Pixar's The Incredibles.
I'll accept that.
Favorite childhood movie with the moral of you have to be born special in order to be special. Sorry, Syndrome. Your super intelligence and ceaseless work ethic don't merit you becoming a super. Luckily,
I don't think it had anything to do with that.
Work hard enough and you can gain yourself super abilities. Case in point, our sponsor for the day, Skillshare, an online learning community.
Alright, he's gonna put his ad there, and I'm not gonna listen to that, because we don't care about his ads. So, what he was saying there about Syndrome, though, is, I guess in a perspective it's true. But if you have to look at it from the perspective that he did get to, he was a multi-millionaire, billionaire, how much money he was making, selling weapons and stuff like that. And the whole purpose of them doing that to him is not because they were saying because you're special, because you have special abilities and stuff like that, you are special. It was the fact of him saying you can use your abilities however you want to. Everybody's special. You just have to reach it out, grab whatever it is special inside of you, and use it to your advantage. He just used it in a way that made him the bad guy. So I disagree with that statement like that. But if you guys enjoyed the video, the original video is in the description down below if you don't want me talking over and stuff like that. I'm on Discord, I'm on Twitter. If you guys enjoyed the video, give it a like. Let me know what other videos you guys want me to react to in the comments down below. Subscribe, and that's it. Later.